In this video, I want to show you how to save data locally to the device using a feature called Shared Preferences. Shared Preferences is designed to allow you to save key value pairs. You can store some primitive types like booleans, floats, strings, simple data types. And if you want to have data that's saved to the device, for example, if you were saving a preference of something that people set in your app. So if you have a layout preference or a certain color or font, different things, if you have settings in your app that you want to save, you can use shared preferences to keep track of them. Let's create a simple app to demonstrate this. Go ahead and create a new Android Studio project. Let's just call this Shared Preferences. Click next or enter, and then we'll go next. And let's start with an empty activity and with the defaults. Once the app opens and the build process finishes, we can go to our activity main.xml file. And from here, we want to go to the design view. If you don't see it already, you can select design down here at the bottom. And we can add a few things. This is just for demonstrating. There are two ways you can use shared preferences. One is something that's local to the activity, and the other is if you want to share a setting or a value that can be accessed by other activities in your app or even other applications that you may write. All right, so here we have a text field. If I select that and I go ahead and I click here, it says delete constraints. Let's remove the constraints for now and make sure that the constraint auto connect is turned off. Notice how it's got that symbol. So let's just keep this and let's move it up here to the top, and I will drag the constraint to the top and then let go. And currently it's set to margins of 8. I can just manually change this margin over here to 16. And then if I right click on the text view, then I choose center, we could say center horizontally. All right, let's add a couple of buttons. Click and drag a button out here, and let's do the same thing. We're going to create a connection and then right click and center. Finally, let's do the same thing for this other button. And we'll drag and create a connection there and right click and center horizontally. All right, very good. For this first button, we're going to change its text, and we're going to say set food. And then for this, for this next one, we'll select this button and we're going to say set color. All right, let's go back to our main activity class and let's create a couple of methods. These are functions we're going to call when we click these buttons. So for the first one, we're going to say public void set favorite food, and that's going to take a view which we'll then reference if needed. Notice here this didn't import. If I click over here and I open up my imports, it doesn't know what this is. When you're clicked into it, if you press Alt Enter, then it may show this import class if you haven't done it yet, or then you go ahead and click import class. You may notice when you use Alt Enter or Alt Return again that it automatically will import the class for you. All right, let's add a second method called public void, and guess what? Set favorite color. It also takes a view, and there we go. Now let's hook up the events on our buttons. So click back to the main.xml. Let's select our first button, and then over here on click, we're going to say set favorite food. Go ahead and select color, and we'll say set favorite color. All right, now that we've got our layout set up, let's go to main activity. There are a few things we're going to do. We want to create a shared preferences variable that we will then reference within the app. So if I come up here and I'm going to say shared preferences, so I selected that, I pressed tab, and then auto completed and imported it for me. Shared preferences, and I want to call this local prefs. The other thing we want to do, notice here, if I go back to my main XML, notice I have this text view here. I want to reference that as well. So in order to access that across multiple functions within this class, I'm going to create a variable here, and we're going to call this text view, and we'll just call it text view. All right, now what happens then is you can check if you have anything saved in your local preferences and assign it to wherever you're going to use the value. So what I want is to set my favorite food and save it in a local preferences. When the app starts on the onCreate, I want it to check for any saved preferences, look for the key value that I set for food, and update this text view. So first, we can do that by initializing the local preferences. So we're going to say local prefs, and we're going to say equals this, which refers to the activity. And we want to use a method called getPreferences. With getPreferences, we're going to set what we call a mode, which says I can use this preference either locally within my app or it's public across multiple apps. In this case, we're saying context.mode_private. So I just tabbed and it auto-completed that for me. All right. Once I get a reference to the local prefs, then I want to check if there is an existing string for my favorite food. So we'll say string and then call this saved fave equals, and we reference the local prefs dot get string. Now what this is going to take is a key, which is a predetermined value that says when I save this value, it's always referenced by this as a unique key. And if there is no key, then we want to do a default value. So for now, let's just start with the key that I want is I'm going to call this favorite food. And then if there is no favorite food saved, return a default value. And that's going to be called, we're just going to say unknown. This will make sense after we get through with it, but I just want to show you here we're loading, we're saying the key is favorite food and then give me the value and return it as saved fave. If the value doesn't exist, if favorite food doesn't exist, then just set the value to unknown. The string would be unknown. Once we get that, then let's initialize our text view by saying text view. We're casting it to a text view, and we say find view by ID. And in this case, it's going to be text view because that's the default. And you can check that if you go back to the activity main, you select the text view, and notice the ID is text view. You could certainly change this if it doesn't make sense. If you have more than one, obviously you want to change the name. All right, let's go back here. Once we have a reference to our text view, then I want to set the text. So we say text view dot set text, and we're going to say my favorite food is, and then a semicolon, and then space, and then we're going to plus, and then saved fave. So here we're concatenating a string with a variable. All right, let's run this and see what happens. Go ahead and run. You can choose an emulator. I'm going to choose an emulator in my case, or you could run it on a device. Either way. And once the app runs, then notice it says my favorite food is unknown. Now I can click these buttons, but nothing happens because we haven't added the code. So let's go back. Let's stop the process. And let's update our method where we set favorite food so that it saves a local preference for our favorite food. Okay. In order to do that, for now, I'm just going to hard code a string. So I'm just going to say string fav food equals, and you'll never guess, pizza. Okay. Now we need a reference. From our local preferences, we have what we call an editor. And so if we need to create a reference to this editor, which is a SharedPreferences dot capital E for editor. And then this object will reference local prefs dot edit. From here, I can say editor dot, and I want to say put string. Now notice here, if I wait before completing it, you have these options. You can put string, put long, int, float, boolean, string set. So those are your options when it comes to saving. Now let's go ahead and say put string, and the first thing we need to pass is our key, and the key needs to be unique. So if I say favorite food, and then the value, which in our case is fav food string. Finally, we're going to say editor dot commit. Okay, let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. All right, let's go ahead and select set food. Now, we haven't done anything to update the text view, so we won't know if it's loaded properly, but let's go ahead and stop the app and let's run it one more time. And notice it's loaded up, and now we have pizza. Awesome. So here we have used shared preferences to, first we check if a value has been saved, then we load that value if it has. If not, it'll return a default value. Then in this case, and this again, this is just a simple app, you wouldn't really apply it this way, but here I am, I'm just setting and saving a value and then committing it. All right, let's take a look at a couple of things before we finish with this example. Notice down here it's saying consider using apply instead. Commit writes data, persistent stores immediately, whereas apply will handle it in the background. For our case, we're using commit. It's a very simple value. We're not using a lot, saving a lot of data, so it's okay. But what they're recommending, is changing this to apply. And you can certainly do that. What happens is it will save it, and save it without interrupting the UI if you were using a large value. The other thing I want you to notice here, right now we have this hard-coded string, and it's not very efficient to have these hard-coded strings, because here I'm referencing favorite food here and favorite food there. So one thing you can do is use the quick edit menu to extract this as a string resource. So if I press Alt Enter or Alt Return, it brings up a menu, and notice it says extract string resource. Let's go ahead and do that. Now notice here I can give this a resource name, and this is very similar. This is the exact same thing we did with the previous couple of videos ago, where we were using string resources instead of hard-coded. So here we can give this a name, and I can call this favorite food key, and then it's going to save it. There's the value, and this can be unique. We could change this if we wanted, but for now we're going to keep that. So go ahead and click OK. Now notice that here it goes to our string resource. Let's go ahead and look at that. Twirl open the app, and then res folder, and then values. And then if you double click and you see strings, so now there's my favorite food key. That's the proper way to do this, to have a string resource. Whoops, let's go back to the class. And notice what it did is it called a method getString, and then it passed in a reference to there. So I'm just going to copy that and replace this, and I'm going to replace the string itself. getString. Very good. All right. In the next video, I'm going to show you how to use shared preferences and to share data across activities.